Welcome to the first public broadcast of the town of Essex. The regular meeting is for Tuesday, September the 3rd, 2013. Present is Deputy Mayor Richard Meloche, Ward 1 Councillor Morley Bowman, Ward 1 Councillor Randy Vokes, Ward 3 Councillor Bill Baker, and Ward 4 Councillor Sherry Bondi. Now let's join council in session.
The next bid, which was Amico Construction, was for the $218,000, had a week delivery time of 17 to 21 weeks, which was acceptable. The bid itself is acceptable. So that's really in a nutshell the reasons.
Okay, thanks. So this permits you to obviously receive it a lot sooner because you wouldn't be able to use the current equipment long enough. Is that right?
Through your worship, correct. I mean, we get it in half the time, and we get it in anticipation for the start of next year's season. So I'm not sitting using my old sweeper for another year.
Any further questions? If none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Next, we have Infrastructure and Development Report number 1309, results of the Jenner Street infrastructure improvements. Moved by Councillor Bowman, supported by Councillor Baker. Any discussion or questions? All in favor of the motion? That's carried. Next is we'll have a small presentation from Russ Phillips, our CAO, regarding Pat Gillen's ATV request.
Thank you, Your Worship. A brief presentation with respect to the provincial law and ATV guidelines. A few slides just to walk you through in terms of the background, the history, having to do with the Off-Road Vehicle Act and the all-terrain vehicle legislation in Ontario. The material that you're going to see is being provided to us by the OPP. Unfortunately, Rick Mailing was not available to attend this evening. However, he supports, and I'll conclude my remarks, he largely supports the recommendations coming forward by your administration. The Off-Road Vehicle Act covers all vehicles under the all-terrain vehicles and any vehicle designed for off-road activity, and I'll define those. This presentation will define those in a moment. It governs off-road vehicles, which includes ATVs. And there's been no recent changes to this legislation in Ontario. They are covered under the Highway Traffic Act. There are portions of the HTA that are identified and respect ATV use. Section 316 of the HTA effectively guides the use and governs all activity of ATVs and off-road vehicles anytime that they're operated on a highway. This came into effect in 2003, so it's been with us for well over 10 years. Definition under the Highway Traffic Act is any common or public highway, street, avenue, parkway, driveway, square, place, bridge, viaduct, or trestle, or any part which is intended. So it kind of gives you the background on where what is covered by a highway. When we talk about highway, it's talking about every avenue or parkway. Off-road vehicles are defined in the Act, and that means a vehicle propelled or driven other than muscle power and designed to travel on not more than three wheels, on more than three wheels and being prescribed class of vehicle. So effectively, those are off-road vehicles. Some of them are also ATVs, but we'll get into that in a minute. Off-road vehicles also include these types of quads and vehicles that are designed for public use or enjoyment, that type of thing. They do not include golf carts, mobility wheelchairs, and Argos or all-terrain or an amphibious vehicle. So it excludes those specifically. That's not to say that you can use your golf cart to travel down a country road or a town road. It just means that they're not covered under that act. The definition of an all-terrain vehicle is also under Section 316.03, and it means any off-road vehicle that has four wheels, the tires of which are all in contact with the ground, has steering handlebars as opposed to a steering wheel, and has a seat that is designed to be straddled by the driver as opposed to be sitting on a vehicle or sitting in a vehicle. It also is designed to carry a driver only and no passengers. And this gets interesting in their definition, because there are ATVs that I think I look at them and think, well, that's covered under that regulation, but the moment that it has a buddy saddle on it, it's not. So that's what the Act covers under an all-terrain vehicle. Those are examples of. Under the Highway Traffic Act, no person shall drive an off-road vehicle on a highway except in accordance with the regulations and any applicable municipal bylaw. Municipalities have the authority to pass special bylaw removing the restriction of the use of an off-road vehicle on a residential street or any roadway within our municipality. Council has that authority to do that. There are some exemptions. Where persons are driving directly across a highway, they are entitled to do that. Farmers and licensed trappers are allowed to use their vehicles, their off-road vehicles, on country roads, provided that they display certain signage and that they're operating them in accordance with the law. And public works employees, which includes fire, ambulance, police, municipal hydro, telephone, and rail workers, where they're specifically governed under the law to use that equipment for those specific purposes. Again, not getting too far into the regulations, but the Ministry of Transport of Ontario has the authority to make new classifications of ATV, which they do from time to time because the industry has changed. The council, as I said, the council of a municipality may pass bylaws which permit the operation with 3 or more wheels and low-pressure bearing tires on any highway within the municipalities under jurisdiction of the municipality, or any part or parts of such highway, and we gave you the definition of highway before. They get into prescribing different rates of speed. You have that authority. You have the authority to define different aspects of a highway, but once it's opened, once you've defined an area or a roadway or a section of the community, it's open to all. It's open to all such vehicles. There's no further restriction that can be provided for under the Act. So a bylaw that may permit the operation of off-road vehicles with 3 or more wheels and low pressure can only be specified. The only thing you can do to restrict it is to specify hours, or to specify certain months of allowance. That's the only thing. Once you've opened up that roadway, that's the only thing you can guide them by. If it's passed by a municipality, the council of the municipality, or a police services board for regulating, if the provision is passed, then it's up to the police to regulate traffic on the highways or prohibit the regulation of the operation. So this is where the police gets in. It's really inconsistent with this Act or the regulations that the provision of the bylaw shall be deemed to be repealed upon the inconsistency. So if there's any inconsistencies, it's pulled. And that's one of the issues that the police have issue with. This is getting into the specifics of the Act. I won't get into the details into this. Any subject to subsection 2, the highways that you would define, or the roadways that you would define within the community, have to be listed on Schedule B. You'll create a special schedule that is attached to your governance or to that bylaw, and that they would be listed, and they will be actually shown under the HTA under future revisions. That allows police then to regulate that activity. Where all-terrain vehicles may be driven on a highway, in addition, to meet the requirements of Part 3, there is only one driver and no passenger. So again, even though it's classified as an ATV and could carry 2 passengers, it cannot in this case. So once you give that allowance, it can only be for the use of one rider. Gets into a whole host of schedules. I won't, again, we'll skip that piece. Sorry, a lot of detail here that was provided to us that probably gets into weights. There's a number of restrictions in terms of what the sizes can be. Again, the equipment must be operated properly. There has to be braking systems, headlights and reflectors if it was made after a certain date. And then the windshield, if there's one so equipped, it has to meet safety requirements. Views, permits. The key piece there is a driver's license of class G2 or M2 or higher has to be held by the operator of said equipment if council so chooses to pass such a resolution or a bylaw. Helmet is required. Speed limits, no greater than 20 km/h in a zone of not greater than 50. So even though it's posted 50, they can only do 20. And 50 where it's greater than 50. It's consistent with, under the HTA, it has to be consistent with all those other motor vehicles, operate on the shoulder in the same direction of traffic, if no shoulder, etc., etc. So it gets into a number of details as to how it has to be operated on a municipal roadway. Shall not be driven through construction or on a closed highway. We see enforcement as being problematic due to the perceived ambiguity of allowing the use of an ATV on a municipal roadway. The bylaw becomes difficult to enforce. As I rolled through that presentation to you, I trust it's clear that it's not very clear as to what is an ATV, what is an off-road vehicle, what's allowed, what's not allowed. That becomes a problem for our local police services to enforce when they can't define correctly what it is. Then who is allowed and who is not allowed. And so it's one of those that once you open it to one, and we understand very clearly that the request of the one individual at this point in time is largely for medical reasons and for their mobility. However, the law does provide there are other devices that individual could use legally to access or to assist that individual with her mobility. The difficulty OPP and your administration see is in enforcing that. Once you've opened that door to one, you've opened it to effectively anybody that owns an ATV or wishes to use an ATV on that roadway. And then the question becomes, is once it's again the bit of the wedge. If you open that door slightly, have you opened it to all such uses if you deregulate, say, a wider area of the community? So in the opinion of the local OPP, this is not recommended, and your administration does not recommend at this point in time. That concludes my presentation. I'll be pleased to answer any questions.
Any questions for us? Councillor Baker.
Through you, Acting Chair. Thanks for the presentation. So in this particular case for Ms. Gillen, her request was for medical reasons and to use it within her residential area, or was it on a number of designated roads? I can't remember now.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it was to access one designated roadway to get to the harbor or beach area, I believe, right, if I remember correctly. And so you said in your presentation that there are devices that she could use legally in this case, and those were showing up there. I think those medical devices, 3 wheelchairs. That's correct. So what you're saying is if we have the power to do this and designate the roads, but if we do this, then we're opening up a whole other situation. Each individual could come forward, or those areas, anybody can drive those ATVs on them. Is that right? Through you, Mr. Worship, once you've opened that, once you've approved that bylaw, there's no further restriction. Anyone that meets that criteria under the Highway Traffic Act or under the Off-Road Vehicle Act can access that roadway or any other roadway that's being defined. The difficulty we see is it's once you've seen somebody operating an ATV legally on a roadway, what's to cause them to resist trying it somewhere else? And then that becomes an enforcement matter. Okay. So let me go back and ask a question, because there's a reason. I can't remember if there were golf cart type vehicles, or do we have the ability to be able to put that in the bylaw? Or that one of the restricted ones? I can't remember. There's a reason for my asking. Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding, and we would have to get clarification on this through the OPP, but my understanding is that a golf cart has other restrictions that don't allow it, because it does not have, it doesn't have signals or lights. They're not equipped as such, so they're not allowed to be operated. So the only thing that can be operated effectively is a mobilized wheelchair. Even though it's not covered under the ATV ORV Act, It can be used on crossing roadways through residential subdivisions and things like that, where you see a contiguous routing of a golf course through those, but they're not allowed to be operated along a roadway.
So we would have, however, and the reason I'm asking, because it's come up in previous discussions, and we've had some residents ask, with regards to, there are some potential developments that we're looking at, residential developments would focus more so on, we'll call it the boomer market and building for that. And it was asked that if, in fact, much like some of the resort areas, we could also incorporate the use of golf carts in there. What I'm hearing is we could, but they would have to be modified to fit some of those regulations with regards to lighting and that. Is that correct?
That would be my understanding through you, Mr. Chair. I think on many of the resorts, they're privately owned, and on private property, they can kind of choose. It's not a municipal roadway per se. It's not opened as a municipal roadway. It's effectively known as a private resort.
And the only reason I ask is that is because it has come forward and asked us that question. So now we have a little bit of an answer that we do have the ability, but there's a lot of restrictions. So, okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Baker. Councillor Vokes?
Thank you, your Deputy Mayor Meloche. Look at the reality is we could sit here all night, talk about it, talk about restrictions, talk about lights, talk about all the other venues, but we all know the e-bike controversy. So I could take an e-bike tomorrow and go wherever I want. Go wherever I want. And the reality is I'll use the same abundance of road, whether I'm on an e-bike or on a four-wheeler. And I just had the opportunity to go to South Dakota, and in South Dakota, in their rural settings, they use them all over the place. And unless you're living under a rock around here, we all know that practically every farm today has an ATV. They use it whether it would be spraying their acreage or just migrating from property to property on a casual visit to see how they're doing. So I don't know why we're fighting it. I don't know why we're challenging it. The smart thing would be to develop a policy that allows it, and with all safety considerations put in place. It's not uncommon for ATV vehicles to run at the same speed as vehicles. It's not uncommon for them to have signal lights, for them to have brake lights, and meet all the demands of any other vehicle on the road. And anybody who's been to Florida and other areas in retirement environments, it's really 90% of their means of travel is ATVs. They're allowed to go onto the roads, they go to their local grocery stores, they come back. It boils down to responsibility of the individual and not really the responsibility of the municipality other than put the guidelines in place. So especially on top of it, when it comes to a physically challenged person, till you walk in my shoes, like honestly, give it a whirl, give life a whirl with restrictions. And then I hear tonight, well, there's other opportunities and other means to transport. Of course there is. There's a four-wheel electric wheelchair that travels about 4 miles an hour and gives you 3 hours of battery. You can do that. You can go up to Zayre's with a pile of groceries on your lap as they fall onto the ground. I think it's ridiculous to say that a physically challenged person can use another means if they have opportunity by use of an ATV. So I encourage council to put policies and procedures in place that is fitting to help the physically disabled, to help the agriculture industry in our environment, our municipality, and let the people be, and for the police to say it's hard to identify, that's ridiculous too. Kidding me? Kidding me? Are you telling me you couldn't educate yourself with a little bit of training and a little bit of perceivably imagery that says this is the one that's allowed and this is the one that isn't? I think that's a weak way out to say that we can't really identify. So when we allow e-bikes and we're not going to allow means of transportation for physically challenged people, and by the way, other physically challenged people who may see it may realize that the municipality of Essex is open to other opportunities. They have an open-mindedness to means of getting around, it may catch on a little bit. So I encourage council to develop a policy that deals with the safety of the community and move with it.
Councillor Baker?
Yeah, through you, Acting Chair. So I understand what you're saying, Councillor Vokes, and I tend to agree with you on some of those areas. But just for clarity, agriculture is allowed to use those vehicles. That is part of this, is permitted use in their work. So that's already taken care of. I see where you're coming from. I think the question is from enforcement. when it's not just those people who have requirement needs, how do you police that? I think that's the issue, and then underage issue as well. I know they're supposed to hold a license, I guess that's criteria. And I don't disagree with what you're saying, I'm just wondering how we would look at permitting this and having it enforced, I guess is the question. That's something that would have to come back for us to look at, maybe at a later date.
Thanks, Councillor Baker. Councillor Vokes?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Melange. To Councillor Baker, when it comes to the agricultural use, I did a poor job of making clarity. There's no doubt that they use it for agricultural use, but I think anybody knows, because of the fact they have it for agricultural use, it's exercised in other means. I think we all know that. That really doesn't have to be said. I think we know that, and when it comes to patrolling, and it's no different than anything else we do, whether it was bylaws we put in place or anything we do, is always set and defined by perimeters. This would be one more of thousands that administration and council oversees on a daily basis.
Thanks, Councillor Vokes. Mr. Phillips, so tonight for this, this was a presentation for information. Is there a recommendation here that we just receive or act on it?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, it's simply for your information at this point in time. There's no associated recommendation other than not to proceed from administration's perspective at this point in time. If you choose to cause administration to go back and draft a bylaw, we'll certainly take that action, but at this juncture, administration was recommending against.
Okay, so first off, I think we need a motion to receive the report, and then if we want to make a motion to do something after that. So supported by Councillor Baker and or moved by Councillor Baker, sorry, and received, supported by Councillor Bondi. All in favor of receiving the report? That's carried. And now I'll entertain another motion if somebody would like to put a motion forward. So Councillor Bowman.
Yeah, I think there's some real issues that's coming up, not only the aspect for policing, but the insurance aspect, because now you would have to bring your roads to a different standard for that type of vehicle. I think it opens a whole new can of worms that I don't think we should be looking at this time. And I would move that we deny the request and send a letter indicating the findings of the staff and what their recommendations were, and that we concur with those recommendations.
So moved by Councillor Bowman. Do I have a seconder?
Discussion
by Councillor Baker. And questions for discussion?
Yeah. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Melange. You know, I don't want to totally disregard it, so I mean, I support the motion so I can discuss it. What I'd like to see is that if administration could look at some other municipalities that may be implementing some form of this practice to see if there's some opportunity to look at this on an individual basis. To totally just turn it down, I understand the presentation and I get the reasonings for it, but maybe while we receive this, and I can support this tonight, but I'd like to make a friendly amendment that we ask administration to look into other municipalities who may be you know, kind of looking outside the box and looking at this type of off-road service. So if maybe we can look at some of the municipalities and come back and see if there are some and what they're doing with that, if that's a friendly amendment, hopefully.
Okay.
Okay, so friendly amendment. Councillor Vokes?
Thank you. To Councillor Bowman, could you give me some clarity? You mentioned the roads. It would mean changing the values of the roads. I don't understand how that would.
I'm just saying that in a time when we're always looking at areas of insurance and we have to maintain the roads at a certain level, by putting a different class of vehicle on the road, you're also going to change the level of service you're going to have to supply for those classes of vehicles. So I would think that's a whole new, from signage to everything else that goes along with that. So I think it's a risky slope we're sort of sliding down there. And I guess the other thing is there are other options for the people that need you know, the mobilization to get around. It's not the ATV type thing, it's something else. So what I'm saying is, we're not saying, no, you can't go up and down the roads. We're just saying you can't use ATVs and that type of equipment, so.
If I could continue, so with that being said, I respect what Morley's saying, and hence, even the reason more for a report. I think in diligence of a good counsel, you just can't fluff it off and ask, and where our CAO has suggested a report or offered a report, I think good governance would be to get the report, look at the stats on fatalities, on injuries, on insurance claims, on lawsuits, and in that report will help you apply the diligence to make the right or wrong approach to approving it. And it's just a report we're asking for. It does nothing more than that. So for council not to ask for a report and support or not support through the findings of that report would be the right thing to do. And then if we choose not to support it, we have the documentation that says this is the reason why.
Councillor Baker.
Yeah, I think through your worship, I think that's what this amendment does. It says, can we look at some other municipalities and see what some best practices if they're doing that? So that'll give us back. So,
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you. Some great comments have been said so far. First of all, I want to thank you, Russ, for your time in doing the research for this. It was a very thorough presentation, and it gives us the background we need. And I think that I'm in agreement with Councillor Baker and Councillor Vokes that, yes, there are some concerns if we go ahead and open up the floodgates, but I think at the same time, with our aging population and with us in Essex trying to market ourselves as being, you know, Broomware friendly, I think we just, for my personal peace of mind, I just want to, you know, go the extra step and see if at all there's any possibilities. I know this woman personally. I know she has a mobilized wheelchair. I think that in my heart, you know, sings for her because I'm on the accessibility committee, and it's people that have a disability just want to be able to do the things that everybody else wants to do. And for this woman, it could mean walking down to the beach. You know, yes, she may be able to go down the road, but her ATV may allow her to go on the beach. And I'm not saying I'm in support of allowing ATVs, you know, zooming all over Colchester. Definitely no, not at this point. Not with the traffic, and I'm sure many other residents would have concerns, and I would want to hear from those residents as well. But I do see Colchester evolving into, you know, maybe perhaps golf carts, you know, when we have our trails and golf carts going between the wineries. And I just don't want to close that door forever. So I support the motion with the amendment, and I look forward to seeing. And I don't think this is a high priority level, you know, request either. I think, you know, when administration brings it back, and just take your time, and thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bondi. Any further comments or questions? If not, I'd just like to add one thing, Russ, Mr. Phillips, if you could also maybe get a comment from DPM/Cowan Insurance on what it would mean as far as the joint and several considerations, the 1% rule. I'd be interested in hearing what they have to say about it.
Certainly, the recent attendance at the AMO conference, there was a whole topic or a whole session dedicated to insurance on roadways, and it was interesting the earlier comments Councillor Bowman made in terms of that roadways and the higher standards and things like that. There was a lot of discussion about that, so there's some research work that's out there. There's a body of research that we can certainly investigate, and we'll come back with a further report.
Thank you. So at this point in time then, if there's no further questions, I'll call the question. All in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you.